So, deep in the heart of Bavaria, more than 100 years ago, an entire family was just wiped out in a single night. And the craziest part? The killer was never, ever found. Today, we're digging into Germany's most infamous cold case, the Hinterkaifeck murders.
For days, nobody even noticed they were gone. I mean, think about it. This is the remote Bavarian countryside in 1922. A family could just disappear. The mail started piling up, the cows weren't being milked, an eerie, unnatural silence just fell over the whole farm. Something was very, very wrong.
When neighbors finally decided to go check on the family, they walked into a scene of, well, unimaginable horror. 6 bodies. The entire household had been brutally murdered. And this was just the beginning of a mystery that would go on to haunt Germany for a century. Okay, so to really get this crime, you have to understand the place itself. This wasn't some city murder with a bunch of witnesses and noise. Nope. This was an act of violence that happened in the deepest, most profound isolation you can imagine. We're talking about 3 generations of one family just completely wiped out. There was the patriarch, Andreas Gruber, and his wife, Cecilia. Then their widowed daughter, Victoria, and her 2 small children, Cecilia and Josef. And even the new maid, Maria, who had literally just arrived at the farm hours before, even she wasn't spared. Hinterkaifeck was totally cut off. It was surrounded by nothing but fields and this dense forest, well over a kilometer from the nearest house. Out there, nobody could hear you scream. Nobody could see a stranger walking up to your door. The family's isolation, it was their sanctuary, sure. But in the end, it was their tomb. But here's what makes this story truly bone-chilling. The murders didn't just happen out of the blue. Oh no, there were warnings. In the days leading right up to the attack, the farm was just plagued by a series of really strange and deeply unsettling events.
I mean, just imagine how you'd feel. The father, Andreas Gruber, finds a single set of footprints leading out of the dense woods, right to his home, but no tracks leading away. Then soon after, the whole family starts hearing footsteps coming from the attic. Things around the house are being moved. This wasn't just some ghost story. It felt like someone was already inside, hiding and watching them.
And it wasn't just about weird noises. The family actually told their neighbors they had this overwhelming feeling of being watched, constantly, by some unseen threat. But with no real proof and no one to turn to for help, they were just alone with their fear. So all of this creepy, atmospheric dread, it all came to a head in one absolutely horrific night of violence. The phantom that had been haunting the edges of their lives finally decided to step out of the shadows. The weapon used was a mattock, a heavy farming tool that was taken from their own shed. Think about that. This wasn't a weapon that was brought to the scene, it was an instrument right off their land, familiar to anyone who worked on a farm. The choice of weapon alone suggests the killer knew their way around a place like this, and the brutality, it was just staggering. The attack itself was just chillingly methodical. The killer, or maybe killers, somehow managed to lure 4 family members into the barn one by one. After that, they moved silently into the house to murder the other 2 victims right in their beds. This whole sequence, it just screams of a cold, calculated plan to eliminate every single person on the property. And right in the middle of all this horror, there's a detail of just profound tragedy. Evidence at the scene, like clumps of hair found in young Cecilia's hand, suggested that she'd actually torn it from her own head in terror. Her body was found right next to her baby brother, like a final, heartbreaking attempt to protect him. So, in the aftermath, you can bet a massive investigation was launched. But for every single question the police asked, they just seemed to find more mystery. The case very quickly became this frustrating maze of dead ends. The investigation basically hit a brick wall immediately. Was it a robbery? Well, no, because a large sum of money was left completely untouched. Okay, so maybe revenge? But the police couldn't find anyone with a clear, strong motive. They even looked into Victoria's estranged husband, who was thought to have died in the war years earlier, but there was zero proof he was even alive. With the limited forensics they had in the 1920s, every single lead just fizzled out. So, with no answers from the official investigation, the case just passed into legend. It became Germany's great unsolved nightmare. It was a story told in whispers, with decades and decades of speculation trying to fill the massive void left by the total lack of evidence. Over the decades, all the theories have really boiled down to 2 fundamental questions. Was the killer an insider?
You know, someone who knew the family, their routines, the layout of the farm. Or was it a complete stranger, a drifter who just stumbled upon this isolated home and saw a dark opportunity? Without any evidence, both possibilities are equally terrifying.
And that's exactly why, a whole century later, this case still gets to us. Hinterkaifeck has become a cornerstone of true crime lore. It's this perfect storm of rural terror, bizarre warnings, and absolutely zero resolution. It taps right into our deepest fear of the unknown, that threat that might just be hiding beyond the trees. In the end, we're just left with this one haunting question. And get this, the killer fed the livestock and apparently stayed in the house for days after the murders before just disappearing as mysteriously as they arrived. They took their name, their motive, their secret with them forever. So, who was this phantom that brought such horror to a lonely Bavarian farm? We'll probably never know.